and welcome to Pop Culture Cuties, the podcast that blends local business with the broader pop culture. Each week, I sit down with Georgia's movers and shakers, business owners, creatives, and industry insiders to talk about their work, their journey, and how their field connects to the broad cultural landscape. So if you love great conversation over tea and wine, then this is the place for you. So before we get started, I want to inform and remind viewers that the upcoming Volunteers for Literacy Duck Race and Deca-Duck competition approaches. You've seen them on Facebook, in businesses, at Clarksville and Cornelia libraries, and at the annual Mountain Laurel Festival in Clarksville for the past 5 years. Large yellow ducks dressed as characters like Rapunzel, Little Miss Muffet, Clifford the Big Red Dog, Huckleberry Finn, and yes, even Dolly Parton have been the object of exclamation and adoration everywhere they have gone. So the 6th annual Volunteers for Literacy Deca-Duck contest will be held this April, and all duck race sponsors and supporters are eligible to enter. So sponsors are available beginning at $100. Ducks can be decorated as characters from children's books, movies, fairy tales, as well as adult books or movies, or they may be decorated to market a business. Sponsorships are not limited to businesses. So like if you and the family want to get together, support a great cause, decorate a large duck, have it compete with other large celebrity ducks, then you can do it too. So first through third place ribbons actually receive cash prizes. So do something good, do something fun, and if your duck wins, then you get a cash prize. So moving forward, we're going to talk about, establish a couple of house rules for today's episode because it's a little different. It's a solo show where I will discuss how much North Georgia has changed over the past 20 years. And we're also going to talk about the soon-to-be-released Snow White movie, which I will be watching and reviewing tonight, and the With Love Meghan series, which is now on Netflix and has been greenlighted for a season 2, if you can believe it. So tonight, feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat, and also feel free to join in during our broadcast. Give your opinions, ideas, shout out your business. And now that our house rules have been established, without further ado, let's chat. So I'm going to start with Forsyth County because it's kind of my beginning into North Georgia. And I know a lot of you guys are from Forsyth County, and everyone's pretty familiar with Forsyth County. So even the people that live like me in Habersham, or those that might live in Rabun or Lumpkin, a lot of, like, when we leave our country bubble, I call it going to town, and it either involves Gainesville or it involves Forsyth. So all of us have experience in Forsyth County, so we're going to start there. I moved to Forsyth County in 2005, and it was so different than what it is today. Glen Cree, that's where I used to live. It's off of Old Atlanta Road. It was surrounded by by other neighborhoods, kind of your typical middle-class suburban neighborhoods, and there were trees everywhere. And I will say, it's still pretty green. That part of Forsyth has done a good job of maintaining its greenery. But you had places like, Kemp Road, which was quiet. It was meandering lane, full of wisteria and old farmhouses. West of Cumming, like going up 400. It was, not going up 400. This would be over by where the post road is. It was mostly farmland. There was like the hint of future development. You eventually got places like Polo and Vickery Village. But that was just like a blueprint when I first moved there. And it was still really rural. There were definitely more cows than people. Northern Forsyth was just like a mix of starter homes, these kind of McMansions that were really popular in the early 2000s. You had some chain restaurants and an abundance of chicken farms. So the town center had mostly been neglected. We had the courthouse and eventually a really large jail. We'll talk about that in a little bit, about Ford Gravett and kind of that transition. But yeah, it was mostly neglected. You didn't really hang out in the city. There was no real place to congregate in Forsyth back in the early 2000s. Entertainment options were limited to bowling. Shout out to Stars and Strikes. Movies, I think it was Movies 400, and Marketplace Boulevard traffic jams. If you wanted to go out to eat, your options were like Chili's, a country restaurant, but it wasn't your typical country restaurant because it had a whimsical K on it. So when they wanted to be cute, they would spell it with like a K, country restaurant. And eventually, we did get a Cheeseburger Bobby's, which is still going strong. So things did begin to change at around 2015 when Troy Brumbelow ran against Ford Gravett, Forsyth's longtime mayor, who had a fairly poor reputation, if we're being honest. He'd been mayor for something like 40 years, maybe longer, and unfortunately there wasn't a whole lot of city planning in Cumming. Cumming became just this, it was basically like a house, like a little farmhouse, and then you'd add a room, and then you'd add another room with lower grade lumber, and then you'd add another room that was made of brick, and that was Cumming. It was this monstrosity with these, rooms added on to this once cute and charming farmhouse with very little plan or design. And a lot of that changed with Troy Brumbelow. So Troy Brumbelow, he ran against Ford Gravett. He had a lot of momentum behind him. I remember just the feeling of optimism in Forsyth County during that time. And eventually he did win. And unfortunately it was too late to, make the downtown really a feasible place because of the massive jail in downtown Cumming. However, he did have the vision, and as well as several business owners, local politicians, to create the Cumming City Center, which, from what I can see, has been quite successful. I know I've heard like the rent is really high. There's been some turnover rate for the business owners. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a vision, and it's something you can work with as a place to gather, which you didn't have really before in Forsyth County, unless you count the Goodwill parking lot, which the teenagers of Forsyth did count as the gathering place in 2010. So the Cumming City Center is definitely a major accomplishment. It's transformed the town's image, and part of that city center and part of this progress of Forsyth County is really seen in Myth and Legends Coffee House. I think it really and I've written an article to this effect, it represents Forsyth County's evolution. Myth and Legends is owned by Doug Cole, an Ohio native who moved to Dawsonville. He opened Because Coffee and then expanded into Cumming. And the cafe is really cute. It's actually really impressive. I can't even call it cute. It's just impressive. The cafe is styled after a Prohibition-era speakeasy, and it fosters, storytelling, community, and storytelling by way of the concept of myths. Like the theme, one of the themes are just like images of myths in this kind of Great Depression-era style. It's really quite lovely and very modern, and it's something that would have never really existed in the prior to this age, prior to Troy Brumbelow and the Cumming City Center. He made it a place where people wanted to invest. Now, we don't just have Forsyth, obviously, because this whole segment is about the changes in North Georgia. But I do want to focus on, now that I've given some positives about the changes in Forsyth, and there are so many, I also want to focus on something that I hope that can be done better, and that is keeping the trees. So in Alpharetta, they kept their trees, right? And it's a beautiful city. If I had to choose between Forsyth or Alpharetta, it'd be an easy choice for me, even though the taxes are higher in Alpharetta, because they have these beautiful, elegant parks like Rock Mill Park. Is probably, I'm a big national park person, park visitor. Hands down, it is the best city park I've ever been to. It's so beautiful. I mean, there are deer, there's fields of flowers, There's little marshes. It's perfection. Forsyth County does have its greenway. The one especially by the Blue Willow Apartments or Bluegrass Apartments is really nice. But unfortunately, if you compare like Avalon to Halcyon, I would much prefer to spend time in Avalon because Halcyon is, it's very hot. It's all concrete in Halcyon. I think they have like AstroTurf grass in Halcyon. There's no respite from the sun, where you have different grottos of activity in the Avalon. So unfortunately, as Forsyth is growing and there's much greater vision, it's still bereft of that charm that other cities are keeping. For instance, Duluth has been growing, but it's been prepared for that growth. Their civil engineers were ahead of the growth, so there's not the terrible traffic that you see in Forsyth County. And the same can be said for Dawsonville, and that actually leads me to some interesting news. Dawsonville was named the fastest growing county of its size. So for many watching the rapid development in the area, it's no surprise that Dawsonville topped a recent U.S. Census Bureau list for counties with the fastest growing populations. And I lived in Dawsonville, I think circa like 2014, 2013, and I remember them putting in the highway and expanding the highway and putting in the lights well before they had that nice Kroger, well before they had the Publix, well before all of the building came in. They built the roads first. Dawsonville has kind of fallen into that trap of tearing down their trees, and I hope they can move away from that as they develop further, which they undoubtedly will, because there are models of communities that do keep their trees and their charm and their aesthetic appeal. It doesn't have to become a concrete jungle. But I'm not an anti-growth person. I love growth. I look forward to getting more variety of stores where I live in Habersham County. But I also want to keep the trees, and I want there to be better city planning, and that's something that North Georgia, we are evolving so rapidly and in so many great ways, but sometimes it's at the cost of nostalgia. And what I mean by that is that people often resent the growth coming into North Georgia, and because they resent it, they don't prepare for it adequately. And they get the concrete jungle hellscape that they were afraid of getting because they didn't put in the work on the front end. And you can, with proper zoning, create a vibrant community that accommodates everyone, right? That also keeps its trees and has more variety of small businesses. Like, for instance, with zoning, you can make sure that you get the small boutiques, the luxury boutiques, the cute cafes, the as well as some of the chains. It just requires intentionality and just not being afraid of the change, embracing the change. And this kind of goes into what one follower, she left a comment on my Facebook page when I said that we would be doing kind of an open chat where if you have any questions, just drop it in the chat. And she said that her greatest concern was the unflinching stripping of trees. Laurie said, the clearing of huge tracts of trees without regard to wildlife or air quality or noise pollution over the last 2 years in North Georgia is very concerning, and I agree. I live in a new build neighborhood. I have one dead tree. I'm looking at it right now. It's so sad. It's dismal. I have one dead tree. I am growing other trees, although the neighbor boy, when he was cutting my lawn, he's like 16, and it's my fault, but ran over my trees. It's terrible. We had to call his dad because you can't get on to the 16-year-old boy. So anyway, we lost our trees. We have one apple tree now in the back, but yeah, it's kind of dismal and sad looking out of your window and seeing a maple tree that was always dead from the beginning. So keep our trees. Now moving on to another city, that's Dahlonega. And I attended college at University of North Georgia. I attended, I think it was 2014 to 2017. And guys, the thing about Dahlonega back in 2014 is that it was so boring. There was nothing to do. And I go up there now, and I'm so jealous of these kids because they have no idea how good they have it. When I went to University of North Georgia, first of all, nobody was there past 3 o'clock on Friday. And they didn't come back until 8 o'clock on Sunday, okay? So that was lame. And if you wanted to go somewhere, you had gosh, you'd had the Crimson Moon, which was amazing. I so missed the Crimson Moon. I loved it. It's not there anymore, especially before the remodel. I loved it before the remodel. I did not care for all the black. It was just solid black in there after the remodel. It was very cute and Appalachian-y before that. And then there was El Jimador before it changed hands. But now there's all this cool stuff, like Waffles English Tea Room, run by like one of the best people I have met. She's so nice, so smart. And I've not been there recently, but Canopy and Roots Coffee looks so fun for the college students. The bars are open until 10. We had one bar called In Zone on the outer, well, there was, I think, something called Johnny's. But there was one bar called In Zone on the edge of town, and it had a DJ who was a very perverted person with dwarfism who made very weird comments to the college students while he did his DJing. And if you can believe it, that place got shut down by the police for selling alcohol to minors. I know, it's always the ones you most expect. But now they have, I think it's like a ramen bar up there. Oh, we did have Gustavo's. And Gustavo's still stands strong. And that brings me to kind of the end of this segment. If anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll talk about it. And I'm going to move on to talk about some culture. So part of Pop Culture Cuties is that we talk about the local, we try to connect it to the broader culture. I will say this one doesn't quite connect as much to, the connection between the culture and the North Georgia doesn't quite fit as neatly as it normally does. Typically this is more of an interview style podcast, but today it's a solo act because I am making the great sacrifice to go see Snow White tonight. And I'm going to give you kind of my pre-show thoughts before I go. And I will say I recently watched the older movie because my daughter had a bad dream. She woke up at like midnight, so I put on the animated version because I thought it would be sweet. But y'all, that movie was kind of scary actually. I was really surprised at how dark that movie was. For instance, when the evil queen wanted to get rid of Snow White because she was more beautiful than the evil queen, he sent a huntsman to go stab her in the heart and put the heart in a box. And I gotta say, that's pretty hardcore. And we were watching it, the shadow of the huntsman over a crouching Snow White, and before he decides to have mercy on her, and he tells her to go flee into the woods, and then she flees into the woods. And guys, old school Disney knows how to scare some kids because the trees were terrifying. I mean, they were grabbing her and they had these horrifying faces chasing her down. The logs in the river turned into crocodiles. And eventually you get to this place where they're showing the evil queen, and she finds out she's been deceived. She's going to go get Snow White herself. She's poisoned the apple, and you see this skeleton just reaching out of a prison, reaching for a cup of water, it looks like. So they know how to scare some kids, and I'm pretty impressed. Hopefully one day, no, I'm just kidding. Kind of. But now something I want to address is the belief that Snow White does not save herself in the original 1937 movie, and I disagree. So her strength lies in her gentleness and kindness, so serving as a direct contrast to the evil queen's cruelty. So far from being a passive character, she provides, without any encouragement, she provides comfort, love, stability for the dwarves, offering them something to look forward to, and also bringing a civilizing presence into the home. Snow White is not a pushover. She sets boundaries. She insists that the dwarves wash before dinner and only gives Dopey, who was a little overeager for that kiss, a kiss on the head. And they fall in love with her because she brings value to their lives. And so when she's harmed, the dwarves mobilize in the way that they know best, through action and justice. And this is actually, I think, a very strong example of masculinity for young boys. Snow White's story doesn't diminish male strength. It highlights it in a way that is protective and it's noble. And in an era where women, you see pregnant women, on a subway standing and there's just a bunch of young men sitting down, I think that's actually a really positive message for men and young boys, because while there's plenty of movies that emphasize girl power, Snow White represents a different and now underrepresented form of female strength, which is one that's rooted in grace, resilience, and the ability to inspire others around her. It also provides this example of healthy, chivalrous masculinity. And, you know, so I know the goal is to reimagine the story for different audiences, but I believe that actually the audiences could still be served with this old story, because there are still feminine women out there. There are still young boys that want to save the princess. There are still children out there that want to do that, and who live their lives in that way. So it's become kind of an underrepresented form of female strength. And now I've been doing some research on the movie, and I was reading the reviews, and some reviewers are mean, guys. I was looking at Rotten Tomatoes for the Snow White reviews because I'm going to go see it tonight, and I wanted to know what I was getting myself into, and I think I had a 48%. It was not doing well. Dana Han-Klein from We're Watching What? She writes, if nightmares, CG, dwarves, polycules are your thing, boy howdy is there a film for you in the form of the creatively bankrupt live-action remake of Snow White. It made us wish we had our own poison apple to eat instead of watching. It's not all bad, though. Christian Toto from Hollywood and Toto, I think he's like a Christian movie reviewer. He said Rachel Zegler's voice presents power in the heavily reimagined Disney classic. And then we have Steven Silver, the SS Ben Hiked Fresh Score, the most cursed project of the year. Turns out to be pretty good, actually. Nicholas Bell from Fish Jelly Films, in his Rotten Tomatoes score, says, the only positive outcome for Snow White, Disney's latest live-action reimagining of its classic animated catalog, would be if it inspired a moratorium on such blatant consumerist film studio pursuits. I actually agree with that 100%. I can't do any more of these reviews. Now, I really enjoyed reviewing Nosferatu recently, and I have that review on my website. But I cannot take any more of these blatant consumerist film studio pursuits. I won't watch another Marvel movie. You could put a gun to my head and I wouldn't watch another Marvel movie. And I swore I wouldn't watch any of these live Disney remakes, but I've had several requests to review it. So I will do it. It will probably be out tonight. If not tonight, then tomorrow. And you can know if you want to go see it or not, based on perhaps my review, but also just maybe the review on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, something that's funny. And it's the trigger warnings associated with Snow White. The UK often has these trigger warnings. And I gotta say, it did make me chuckle a little bit. I think I saw it in The Guardian this morning. Because even they were teasing it. And the warnings on this movie, and what makes it so funny is that, of course, there's this content in this movie. It's Snow White. But the trigger warning was, a couple gently kiss and are teased about being in love. A character threatens to shove something up another's backside during a comic exchange, and skeletal remains lie on the floor of a dungeon. A warning that characters drink alcohol briefly at the party. And this is my favorite. A girl surrounded by ominous trees. Those trees are terrifying. I agree there. A queen transforms into a sinister old woman. There are also brief sword fights, and a woman is deliberately poisoned. Did you guys know that, spoiler alert, Snow White gets poisoned by an apple? So, going into more of the cultural commentary, so the real curse of this movie, as we know, is not the poisoned apple. It's just a chaotic blend of bad CGI, Rachel Zegler's Lord Farquaad-inspired hairstyle, feud, which I've seen on Instagram a lot. I thought it was fine, but a lot of people sent some criticism there. Feuding co-stars, politically correct dwarves, and the debates on how to make them politically correct and what that looks like. Is there no dwarves? Do we have the politically correct friends? A writer's strike that prolonged continuation. I think Rachel Zegler was a teenager when she started filming Snow White. I think she's in her late 20s now. And there is, let's see, and then just a heavy-handed dose of gender politics. So all of the stuff that actually always goes into princess movies, all of this is always in princess movies, except for maybe the dwarf thing. So reimagining of the Seven Dwarfs, Disney's decision to portray the Seven Dwarfs using CGI characters instead of casting actors with dwarfism led to debates about representation. Actor Peter Dinklage criticized the remake for potentially reinforcing stereotypes, while others in the dwarfism community felt this approach might reduce acting opportunities for them. And so Disney kind of compromised by going in a completely weird direction just by casting 7 magical creatures, which also backfired. I knew before this ever became a project, when they were just making live-action Disney films, I thought they wouldn't remake Snow White because of the problem presented with the dwarves. And it was just as messy as I thought it would be because so many people have different opinions about how it could be politically correctly portrayed. And I will say I'm just glad they didn't choose the 7 magical creatures because that was terrible and scary. Political views of the lead actresses, because when this was filmed many years ago, there was not a conflict between Israel and Palestine. And we are not going to get into that on a show called Pop Culture Cuties. However, the actresses, the differing political stances of the lead actresses, Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot, have added to the film's controversies. And her name is pronounced Gadot. Gadot's public support for Israel and Zegler's pro-Palestine stance have led to polarized reactions, including calls for boycotts from opposing sides. A lot of the coverage for Snow White has actually been centered on Zegler and Gadot's relationship, like they presented at the Oscars. It was very clearly very tense between these two. And, that's been what most of the focus on the film has been lately, is on these feuding co-stars, or potentially allegedly feuding co-stars. And then, of course, there's been the Rachel Zegler made remarks criticizing the original 1937 Snow White, aspects of the original Snow White film, including its portrayal of the prince, and Snow White's characterization of the movie had drawn backlash. Some fans perceived her comments as a disregard for the classic, which it absolutely was, leading to further debates about the remake's direction. But I will say, I've seen growth from Rachel Zegler, because something I have come to learn and understand is that these media, the media will bait actors into saying things that they wouldn't ordinarily say. So, for instance, they might ask Gal Gadot, what's your take on your co-star's views on this? Or what do you think, or to Zegler, what do you think about the sexism of wearing a dress in this film? Something like that. Something that has nothing really to do with the movie. And then they answer, and then that's what the article becomes about. So I think she's finally coming to understand that game and getting smarter in how she answers questions in reviews. Now, moving forward, we're going to talk about Meghan Markle's lifestyle experiment. And I gotta say, I feel sorry for I have a little tiny bit of empathy for Meghan Markle. And I'll tell you why. So, Meghan Markle's latest foray into the world of lifestyle content is many things. It is. I'm not part of the Meghan Markle hate train, okay? It's well produced. It's aesthetically pleasing. And occasionally, it's even a little informative. But mostly, it commits this great cardinal sin of being boring. And look, I'm fairly irreverent, okay? I can handle relatively offensive jokes, dark storylines, edgy memes, edgy themes, but they have to be funny, or if the story is being told kind of earns its darkness, then I accept that. But here's the thing, artistically, they do have to be good. And this show, for all of its pretty packaging, committed the worst possible sin a program can commit, and it was boring. I'm about 3 episodes in, and that last episode, it was sleep-inducing. So I did pick up a few genuinely cute ideas. I did. Don't get me wrong. For instance, I didn't know you could, and this is probably on me. This is just me being a millennial woman, I guess. I didn't know you could cook pasta in the same pan as the meat and the sauce. That was eye-opening. That's actually useful. Thank you. I also liked her garden-themed party for kids, especially the seed-filled gift bags, because I actually detest gift bags because they tend to be filled with these cheap, forgettable trinkets and ultimately end up in a landfill. But the idea of giving kids seeds to plant, that's actually pretty thoughtful. I liked that. That was cute. I might even do it. That said, much of the content, it was almost insulting to my intelligence. Like, it was insulting to the viewers' intelligence, quite frankly. Like, Meghan and Mindy Kaling attempted to convince me that arranging a fruit tray into the shape of a rainbow makes her a domestic goddess. And I could get that from a Pinterest board, honestly, in like 2 seconds. Likewise, there was this weird moment where Meghan took pretzels out of a bag and then put peanut butter on it and then put it in another bag. That was weird. I don't know. I thought that was weird. So I do, however, appreciate that Mindy Kaling admitted to having a party planner and that she used help. You know, she was actually very authentic to who she was. At least someone was honest in this. And where Meghan, on the other hand, it just felt deeply disingenuous. She seemed uncomfortable with her own content, as if she was playing a part she hadn't quite rehearsed. So at times, her desperation to be liked, it was quite literally palpable. And that's where I say I feel a little sad for her. A few of the cringier takes was like when she was saying, it's so fun to create these little moments, and Meghan, it's a fruit tray, right? She even describes her fruit tray as greatness. And when Mindy Kaling sees it, she gasps, "Are you kidding me?" It was frustrating. So the whole thing made me wonder, why are we supposed to take Meghan seriously as a lifestyle expert? Martha Stewart, for example, like, she built her empire on actual expertise. So even if I didn't grow up watching her because, you know, she was in jail during my formative years, I still recognize that she had legitimate homemaking bona fides. Meghan, by contrast, has no prior history of lifestyle prowess. Nothing in her past suggests authenticity in this space. And this is why authenticity matters. So look at Oprah. She launched her interview podcast when that format was at its peak. It was oversaturated on television. But you know why she excelled? It's because she was real. She meant what she said. She actually cared about the people she spoke to, and her staff for decades have backed that up. Meanwhile, Ellen DeGeneres' downfall came when people realized her kindness was all an act. So Meghan's problem is similar. She's trying too hard to be this warm, relatable it girl, but she doesn't know quite how to do it. Now, to be fair, the cinematography is gorgeous, and her wardrobe, chef's kiss, flawless. I even researched a few for outfits. I might buy some for myself. The woman can dress. She's got that, what do they call it? Old money look just down. It's perfect. And she's undeniably beautiful. She's a beautiful lady. But ultimately, the show feels kind of sad. I get the impression that Meghan has been bullied and hurt people, which is probably why she has such difficulties with her staff. And I see her striving and straining, desperate for approval, and on some level, I feel bad for her. Not enough to weep into my pillow, anything like that, but enough to acknowledge that there is something kind of tragic about watching someone so thirsty for approval, yet so incapable of earning it naturally. But I don't want to move away from the biggest crime here. It's not the fruit tray, it's not the pastel tone cinematography, it's not even the attempt to sell us on the most on the most basic homemade taking tasks, it's revelations. It's that this whole thing was just really, really, really boring. And in the world of lifestyle content, boring is unforgivable. So it's probably worth watching, though. Maybe at least the second episode, if only for the experience. You will cringe a lot, especially when Meghan awkwardly corrects her friend for getting her title wrong. But to be fair, there are a few decent ideas sprinkled in. And hey, it's free on Netflix. And with a second season already in the works, Meghan isn't going anywhere. Production companies have decided that she will be a thing, whether audiences actually want it or not. So even if it's a thing that makes you grimace, she'll remain in the ether, lingering in the cultural conversation, no matter what we say. So tonight, I'm going to watch Snow White. I will write the article. It will either be done tonight or tomorrow. And I'll get that information out there. And are there any questions from you guys? Any comments that you want to make? All right, well, guys, I will go ahead and log off. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Pop Culture Cuties. I'm really excited about next week's guest. It's a little different. I'll probably announce that in a few days once she gets me her graphics and information, but it's going to be a fascinating discussion and you don't want to miss it. Thank you guys for tuning in. Good night.